Okay, thank you everybody for coming late on a Friday, but I think it will be well worth your while. I'm really pleased to welcome Susan Carey here. Susan is a professor of psychology at Harvard University. She's taught at NYU and at MIT as well, and she has many accolades. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, or the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She has won many accolades for her book, The Origin of Concepts. And I had the good fortune of meeting Susan when I was a grad student, so I took one of her graduate seminars, and it was really eye-opening for me, and I think changed the way I thought about doing neuroscience and cognitive science and philosophy. And to this day, she is still, to me, the model of what it is to be a cognitive scientist. So I think you're in for a real treat, and with no further ado, I'd welcome Susan. Thank you.
So this is very early days in a research program, and I'm just beginning to go public with it. So my whole career has been concerned with understanding how humans can think the thoughts that we can think. It's a unique phenomenon in the animal world. Only we have literally hundreds of thousands of concepts that no other animal has. So how does this conceptual repertoire emerge over evolutionary time and over developmental time? And in the past 30 years, or 50 years, some of the evolutionarily ancient and innate primitives that get learning concepts off the ground have come into focus. So we know that there are innate sensory, motor, and perceptual representations, and that these are shared with other animals, way back to crickets and rats and mice. And we also know that there are systems of innate representational systems with a very rich and abstract, that have very rich and abstract content and a rich conceptual role, but are otherwise quite perception-like. And examples of that are core cognition of objects, of agents, causal agents, intentional agents, communicative agents, abstract representations of number, among many others. But the existence of those kinds of representational resources that are available to get learning about the world off the ground doesn't preclude the possibility that there might be other types of primitives available. So it doesn't preclude the possibility that there might also be innate representations that are much more logic-like and language-like, because all of the ones that I just mentioned are very perception-like. So what would it be to be logic-like and language-like? Well, you would need language-like and logic-like format for the representation, namely arbitrary unitary symbols like the words in a language, combinatorial productivity, propositional content. These would be representations that bear truth value, and they would need to support deductive inference. So the question that I took on about 10 years ago is, can we characterize this systems of representations with properties like this and distinguish them from perceptual, sensory, motor, and other representations? And if so, can we empirically find out whether non-linguistic creatures, meaning non-human animals and pre-linguistic infants, have representations with these properties? So there's both a theoretical project here of if there is a joint in nature between perceptual representations and these, what it could even look like. That's a theoretical issue. And then there's an empirical issue. How could we ever find out whether animals or babies have a representational system of this sort. So what I want to do is give you some feeling of some beginning to make some progress on those questions. Now, this has been debated in philosophy at least since Descartes. And some philosophers have said, obviously it's true that pre-linguistic creatures and non-linguistic creatures must have representations with these properties. So Jerry Fodor is one of the people who says, obviously yes. And he argues, what allows central conceptual role? How do the outputs of perceptual systems talk to each other if there isn't some domain general language of thought that has these properties? And with respect to babies, they're all, human babies are going to become human adults. So they must have these representational capacities in order to learn language. So obviously, yes, he says. More philosophers have said, obviously, no. Descartes said, obviously, no. Donald Davidson says, obviously, no. I'm here to tell you that this is not going to be settled from the armchair, right? These are, as I just said, a joint theoretical and empirical project. And I think there's two versions. I mean, I take Jerry Fodor's point that obviously human infants are going to acquire a representational system with these properties because they're going to acquire natural language and logical capacities, right? So that's obviously the case. But there are two versions of the possibility of innate support for abstract thought in humans, while still denying nonverbal creatures, including human babies, a Fodorian language of thought. And one is that this type of thought arises in hominid evolution with language and in ontogenesis only upon learning language. So there's innate support for it, but it's within the language acquisition device, right? And another possibility is that it's present in non-linguistic creatures, but implicit, deep in the internal modules of the mind. It's carried. This content is carried by computations that explicit symbols enter into. But in language, we have symbols for those functions themselves, right? So that's a very different manifestation of it. This will become clearer as I go through my examples. So the way you make progress on this kind of question is once you've got a theoretical analysis in mind of what joint in nature you're looking for, you have to just start somewhere. And you do it by coming up with tasks which on their face would seem to require the representational or computational machinery in question. So just on their face. And then if you get a success in a nonverbal creature, you need to rule out deflationary alternatives of the ways they might be succeeding at that task, but not drawing on what you designed it to measure. Or if they fail, you have to rule out that the task was just too hard for irrelevant reasons. I mean, there's just no other way to do it than just start out and start mucking about. And then when you're convinced that the task actually is tapping the content that you're interested in, then the interesting work begins. Because you want to come up with models of the representational system that underlies that content. So you constrain models of the format and the conceptual role by exploring distinctive signatures of different formats and conceptual roles that could be involved in these tasks. So just to remind you, if you know this work, and if you don't, this won't help you. This was the research project that has gone on in the past 50 years in numerical cognition. So the question is, do non-human animals and babies have numerical concepts? And the face-valid tasks include seeing whether babies and animals can represent the numbers of elements in sets like that, or whether they can do tasks like watch 3 crackers go into one bucket and 2 crackers go into the other, and then go to the bucket with more. So those are just face valid tasks that seem to depend upon numerical contrasts. And what we found was, yes, these really are sometimes really numerical. That is, they respond to the numerical content of the stimulus and not to other things correlated with it. And we even know how they work. There's 2 systems. They're really different from each other. They have different psychophysical signatures, and we can characterize what they're like. One of them is called the analog magnitude system. And in that, number is represented by a quantity, a neural quantity, that's linearly or logarithmically related to the cardinal value of the set. So these are analog, this is using line length as an example of an analog representation of quantity. And the idea is that the mental symbols in the analog magnitude system represent number the way line length does in this case. And the signature of this system is that, like the representation of loudness, brightness, length, area, etc., it's subject to Weber's law, right? So the discriminability of 2 quantities is a strict function of their ratio. It's harder to discriminate 7 from 8 than 1 to 2. And you can just see that off the line lengths there. And that's true of these number representations. But there's another model which underlies the cracker choice task that I showed you there, in which the mental models that animals make are working memory models of the actual individuals in the set. So you represent one box by making a working memory model with a symbol of one box in it. And 2 boxes, you have a working memory model, box, box. And I think that those are usually iconic models, and at least in the infant and animal studies. And 3 boxes would be box, box, box. So there's one symbol for each individual in these models, but there's no symbols for integers here, right? So, or any other quantifiers. These are just symbols for individuals. And the numerical content in these models is entirely implicit. It's in the rules that allow you to know when to open up a new object file. And it's also in the computations that these models enter into. So you can use them to compare 2 mental models with respect to one-to-one correspondence to decide which one has more in it. So there is numerical content in these systems, but it's entirely carried by the computation that enables you to set up these models. The only explicit symbols are the symbols for the boxes. Okay, so I'm using this to illustrate 2 things. Whenever we talk, cognitive scientists who are committed to a representational computational theory of mind are committed to there being mental symbols in the head. This isn't a metaphor. This is dead literal, right? These are the basic theoretical entities in cognitive science. And we are committed to there being answers to the question, what are those symbols like? What's their format? Are they iconic? Are they analog? Are they something else? And we are committed to that format being able to support the computations they further enter into. And we're committed there being the answer, what do they represent? What do they mean, these symbols? That's the content. And as I said, that sometimes the content is implicit. It's embodied in the conceptual role, not in the explicit symbol itself. So that's an answer that we need to be open to. The ANS has explicit symbols for cardinal values, parallel individuation. The working memory models does not. Okay, so it seems very likely to me that, that a lot of the logical content of the mind is going to be implicit in this sense. Okay, so what cases would we want to start with if we want to explore the possibility of that non-human animals or pre-linguistic babies have a Fodorian language of thought? Well, we need to come up with case studies which would clearly be on the thought, the Fodorian abstract combinatorial thought case. And logical connectives would seem to be those. So concepts like or and not. Why? They can't be iconic or analog. And if there's anything that participates in abstract combinatorial thought, it's going to be logical connectives, right? So just on their face, these are going to be on the thought side. But we need one more sort of disclaimer. This is a Fodorian language of thought that we're interested in here. We need to know, again, if we adopt a representational computational theory of mind, it's very unlikely that the machinery deep in the modules that underlie any computation, including perceptual ones, doesn't include AND gates, exclusive and inclusive OR gates, negation functions of various kinds. In fact, no computational theory that exists doesn't have those. So, but if our work were done by just making that observation, then I wouldn't be here to talk to you. So the question is, when are those operations available to thought? So we need to know, when are we talking about thought from when are we talking about perception or something else? And as a first pass, thought enters into personal level reasoning as opposed to within module computation. It articulates models of working memory, supports person-level deductive inference, and they're the candidate representations to underlie the explicit symbols of language. So there's a variety of sort of first pass attempts to try to characterize the thought part of the Fodorian language of thought. I'm just saying, I owe you analysis of that. I'm not going to do better than what I just did. All right. So, research strategy. Face valid tasks, rule out deflationary alternatives, constrain models of format and conceptual role by exploring distinctive signatures of different formats and conceptual roles. And the first case study I'm going to do is the disjunctive syllogism and this to look at logical connectives. And the second case study is representations of abstract relations. Okay. There is a face valid task that people have used to explore whether babies and non-human animals can work through a disjunctive syllogism, and it's referent disambiguation and word learning. So if I show you that and I say, where's the DAX? Most of you will say, that's the DAX. And why? Well, the idea is, perhaps, you're saying, well, DAX has got to be one of those two things. Can't be that one because it's a cup, right? Therefore, it must be that one. Now, what gives you it can't be that one because it's the cup could be that there's some constraint on the meanings of words or it's some pragmatic constraint. It doesn't really matter what allows you to eliminate the option of a cup. But the idea is when you do that kind of process of elimination, you are working through a disjunctive syllogism. A or B, not A, therefore B. So when in development, border collies can do this. Border collies who have vocabularies of about 200 words, if you say to them, go get the blicket, and you send them into the other room, and there's 100 things there, but one thing they don't know for a word for, they come back with the one thing they didn't know the word for. So border collies can do it. And here's the story with babies. So the way you do this is you have the babies looking like this, and you say to the baby, look at the cup. And then what you have done is you've measured their baseline preference for looking at one of these or the others before you ever said looking at the cup. And then you just plot, do they increase their looking at the cup after you've said look at the cup? And the answer is between 14 months and 18-month-olds, this is all, for each one of those is an individual baby, they increase their looking at the cup relative to their baseline preference for looking at the cups when you've said look at the cup. That just says this method works. Now the question is, what if you say where's the DAX or look at the DAX? And what you find is 14-month-olds increase their looking at the cup. So they get it wrong. But by 17 months, they are doing what the border collies do, and they look at the cup. Okay, so it looks like by 17 or 18 months, babies are working through on this face valid task, working through a disjunctive syllogism in this case. But there's a leaner interpretation of success. This could be domain-specific content within word learning. There could be a sort of map novel to map novel. There's no premise A or B or not A that's entering into these. That's an alternative to the disjunctive syllogism, and actually there is evidence for that. So there are signatures that could distinguish 1 and 2. One of them is in this very case, you can look at if they happen to be let's go back to here. If they happen to be looking at this when you say, where's the DAX? If they're just mapping novel to novel, they might just stay with that because DAX is a novel word and this is a novel object. But if they're working through a disjunctive syllogism, you might actually see them look back to here to check before they look back. From age 2.5 through adulthood, you see those double checks. 17-month-olds just stick with the novel. And also, you might want to know some signature of deductive certainty. Do they actually draw the conclusion? Do they actually map the word to it? So the way you do that is you show that they can indeed learn multiple new words if you give them direct evidence. If you just show them the DAX and say this is a DAX, and if you just show them a blicket, another novel thing, and say this is the blicket, then you later show them the DAX and the blicket and ask them which is the DAX, they remember it. So they can learn multiple words of just these objects. But what if they got to that via the referent disambiguation? Then they don't actually follow through and do the mapping until they're about 3 to 3.5, and neither do the border collies, right? So it seems like they're not doing all the way through a disjunctive syllogism here. So both of these signatures are absent at these ages, and in dogs, they emerge between 30 and 36 months in humans. So here's a preliminary summary from this first face valid task. Failure at the face valid task reflecting the disjunctive syllogism before 17 months at all. Success from 17 months on, but success may not reflect working through a disjunctive syllogism. It could be a domain-specific computation, and the 2 signatures of deductive reasoning don't emerge until 30 to 36 months. Okay. So how can we get further purchase on this? Look, negation inverts the truth value of any proposition. It picks out the complement of any set, not an elephant, not on this table. It eliminates any option, not the cup, not in this bucket. So there's a variety of functions negation has, but they are intrinsically domain general. That's why this is a good case study for what we're looking at here. So what we want to know is, what about other tasks that on their face might reflect a disjunctive syllogism and that would not be open to the map novel to novel sort of possibility? And there are 2 tasks in the literature that we have explored. One of them comes from the animal literature, and it's taken in the animal literature to show again, that animals can work through a disjunctive syllogism. I'm going to show you can't take it that way, but it's a very simple task. And I'll just show you the task.
Okay, are you ready? Look where it's going. Oh, Kevin, look at this. Okay, where's the duck? Can you find the duck? Yeah, there he is.
Okay. You hid the duck in one of two containers. You don't know where it is. You show them it so it's in A or B. Not A. The child inferred B. Face valid task of a disjunctive syllogism. What happens when you do this? "15-month-olds fail, 17-month-olds succeed." The same developmental picture as in the referent disambiguation case. But you want to rule out deflationary alternatives of the failure of the 15-month-olds. If you're trying to capture the first moment in development when you can see evidence of this process of elimination in a domain general way, you want to make sure that the failure isn't, this is a very complicated task. I actually didn't show you the version, I think.
Yeah, you should stand up.
Yeah.
So look at, because this is the task where the data I just showed you actually.
Oh, are you ready? Okay, look where it's going. Okay, Eamon, look at this. And look at this. All right, where's the ball? Can you find the ball? Oh, where's the ball?
That's a 15-month-old who failed, right?
There.
Okay. That's where these data come from, and it's actually important that you manipulate both objects, because if you just draw attention to one object, babies go to that object later. So this is also true in the animal literature. So you need to actually draw attention to both. Okay, so now, but this is a very complicated task. They have to understand that they're looking for a ball. They have to remember this task through this very complicated thing where you pick up one and manipulate it and show them the other one is empty. 15-month-olds just may lose track entirely of what they're supposed to be doing here. So you want a control task that shows that they're with you, right? So the control task we came up with is very simple. I'm going to show it to you, but before, let me tell you what the difference is. It's exactly the same as what I just showed you, except she separates her hand before she puts them down there, so they can see if they can make a mental model and imagine where it's going. So same thing. So what she did there was she shows them the object, she puts it down, she separates her hand where they can't see it, she puts them both in there so they can't possibly know where it is. But now she's just going to separate it here before it goes down. Okay, and so.
There we go. Okay, you ready? Look where it's going. Okay, look at this. And look at this.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the dog? Can you find the dog?
Mm-hmm.
You found it again.
Okay, and what you now find is that 15-month-olds succeed. So this shows that the 15-month-olds understand the task, that they haven't forgotten, that they're not confused by the manipulation of the objects. What they can't do is infer where it is from evidence of where it's not, right? There is some change between 15 and 17 months, same age as in the referent disambiguation. Okay, so we then looked at another task that has this structure in the causal reasoning literature. So this is the famous Blicket detector task, where in this game, there are a bunch of objects, and some of them, when you put them on this machine, make it do something interesting, like a light go on and a sound. And others are just causally inert. So the first kind of task, just to show this to them, is you show them that the green thing makes the thing operate, and the red one doesn't. And then you say, can you make it go? And they better put the green thing on. But the exclusion case, the disjunctive syllogism case, is called indirect screening off in the causal reasoning literature. What you do is you show them that the yellow one and the purple one together make it go. But now that's ambiguous, whether you need both of them or just one of them. Then you show the purple one doesn't make it go. And then you say, can you make it go? So here, there's more possibilities at the ambiguous case, but it's completely disambiguated at this point. And the idea is it's A or B, it's not A, therefore B. So same structure, okay? And so here's the data from 15-month-olds and 17-month-olds. This is the no inference case, where you've just seen one. The blue one worked and the yellow one didn't work, and then you're asked to make it go. This is a hard task for 15-month-olds. They're just slightly better than chance, but they are better than chance at both ages in the no inference case. And again, they utterly fail at the 15-month-olds utterly fail when it's working through the disjunctive syllogism, and the 17-month-olds succeed. So we have three cases of an emergence of success on this these three face valid tasks that might implicate the disjunctive syllogism. So there's a domain general change between 15 and 17 months. And now we want to go at how is negation implemented in successful performance at 17 months, the not A part. And is the change that's happening between 15 and 17 months in the relevant reasoning ability, representation of negation or computations of negation, or is the change in an information processing capacity allowing demonstration of those representational or computational capacities? We've made some progress towards these questions. These questions are both still open at this point. As I said, this is early days in a research program. So how is negation implemented in successful performance at 17 months? One possibility is that there's a domain general symbol for negation in the language of thought, something that means not, and it composes with standard conceptual combination with not X. So not active in the Blickett detector case, not in the bucket, not the cup. And that what's changing with development is the either this explicit symbol in language of thought becoming available, or the particular kind of conceptual combination, phrasal level conceptual combination that's needed for this task. That's one possibility for what could be changing if it's something internal to the negation itself. But there's another possibility, which is that there's nothing like that that's underlying success at 17 months. Rather, there's something like an option elimination procedure. Okay? You represent alternatives in working memory. You eliminate on the basis of domain-specific concepts like empty or inert, and you keep track of which ones have been eliminated. That implements a form of negation, but it wouldn't allow you to think thoughts like, if it's not A, then it's B, or A or not B, or even condition a rule on a representation not X. So this would count as, I think, a domain general. If you had a domain general procedure for doing that, then that's definitely a function of negation, but it isn't the Fodorian function of negation. Okay? So what we have done is tried to explore whether not X as the antecedent to a rule is available to children before 15 months. Because on the first option, what will be changing is it's not available to it's available. So is there evidence that not X is not available? not X is not available to thought before 15 months? And the answer is yes in 2 experiments. Benvenides, Varela, and Mailer tested 7-month-olds in a paradigm that looks like this. Forget these, okay? So the baby's just looking at this, and the baby hears, so tu ma ve fi, so tu ma ve fi, so tu ma ve fi. And if they hear that, it predicts that a puppet will appear at the right. And then there are 12 different nonsense syllable strings, very, very different from sa tu ma fe vi, which predict left. Okay? So you could learn the rule sa tu me vi fe mi, or whatever it is, predicts right, and not sa tu me fi mi predicts left. So can they learn both of those rules? And the answer is they easily learn this one predicts right, and they're at chance for all the others. So it's not like they don't learn always look right, because they distinguish the one that predicts right from the ones that don't. They just don't learn the rule, not that predicts left. Okay, those were 7-month-olds, and that's a very complicated paradigm because it requires learning 2 rules at once. Big executive function demands. So Roman Feynman and I and Carey Cushman did an experiment with 7 and 14-month-olds in which they only had to learn 1 rule. And this was in the context of work in goal attribution. So if you show the child that an agent repeatedly reaches for this instead of this, babies as young as 5 months old expect you to, they represent this as the goal of your reach, and they expect you to keep reaching for it if you, for example, move these around or whatever. So what we did was we taught one group of babies that the agent always reaches for this bottle when it's paired with this on the first trial, this on the second trial, so this moved around, this on the third trial. So they always reach for the bottle when it's A versus B, A versus C, A versus D, until they get bored with what you're showing them. And then, so that's the first one. Agents reach for X, a ball, when it's X and A, X and B, X and C. They habituate. Then you show them X and Z, which they've never seen before. The expected outcome is that the agent will continue reaching for X. And an unexpected outcome is the agent reaches for Z. And babies show in these experiments longer looking when it's an unexpected outcome. And indeed, in this top case, both 7 and 14-month-olds looked longer when the baby you've taught them always reach for the bottle, and now you give them a choice between the bottle and the cup. If they reach for the cup, the babies look longer, right? So they've learned the rule, always reaches for X, even when it's paired with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. But the interesting question, can they learn always reaches for non-X? So now the agent reaches for A, B, or C in this circumstance. It's always the bottle and it's something else. And what they're doing is they don't want the bottle. Can they learn that rule? And the answer is no, not at 7 months, not at 14 months. They're just a chance. Okay, so there's 2 attempts to try to condition babies to learn a rule formulated in terms of not X, and they don't do it, and they're both below 15 months of age. So that's consistent with maybe the change that's happening between 15 and 17 months is something about being able, having this negation operator available or to do this composition. However, there's, I think, reasons to believe that even 17-month-olds are not doing it in this compositional way. And here's the argument for this. New strategy. Look for evidence of a large gap between a word's entering the lexicon and its being assigned the relevant meaning. If there's no gap, then maybe the explicit symbol in the language of thought was already available there to support the meaning of the word. If yes, it's possibly convergent evidence for some kind of discontinuity in the representation. So the reason this is relevant is that you won't be surprised to know, if you're a parent, that no comes into the child's vocabulary very, very early. So it's one of the top words in 12-month-olds' productive vocabulary. And if you look at, starting at 17 months, what proportion of children are saying no, it's virtually all of them. But none of them are saying not. Okay? So here's production of no on the top, production of not on the bottom. So the question, though, is what do no and not mean to babies? Are they truth functional operators? So we can use the same task that I've just been showing you to look at that. What if you show the baby something hidden in one of these two containers? You just hide it the way that Shilpa was doing in the experiments before. And then you say to the child, it's not in the truck. Can you find it? Right? So can they understand not in that truth functional way? And what we're interested here, so we had 4 negative trials, 4 affirmative trials, 3 age groups, and the 3 age groups were chosen by these production graphs. So at the age where at least half of the children are producing not, at an age where some kids are but not all are, and then an age where none of them are. Okay? So this is production. The experiment I've told you is comprehension. And here's the finding. At the age where the kids are not producing not, they're also completely ignoring it. When you say it's in the bucket, they look more toward the bucket. They go search for it in the bucket. When you say it's not in the bucket, they search more in the bucket. They're going to the wrong one to exactly the same degree. There's no difference. If you plot not correct, but you plot the proportion of time they look in the bucket, it's exactly the same whether you said it's in the bucket or it's not in the bucket. At 24 months, when some of them are saying they're a chance on the negation one while they're succeeding at the affirmative one, it's not until 27 months that they work out the meaning of not. This is a replication of that with just the 2 younger ages, exactly the same data. So children comprehend not as soon as they produce it. Okay? So that's tracking the age at which they're producing it. But there's no gap. So this timing suggests that the meaning of not is truth functional from as soon as it enters the child vocabulary. But they've been producing no for over a year at that point. So the real question is, does no have the relevant truth functional meaning prior to 27 months? So we just repeated this task. Now to make it pragmatically felicitous, the parent asks, is it in the truck? And the experimenter says, no, it isn't. And then the parent says, can you find the ball? Okay? And what do you get? Exactly the same data. 20-month-olds ignore the no. Right? The parent mentioned a bucket, and they go look in the bucket, whether the experimenter said, yes, it's in the bucket, or no, it isn't. Yes, it is, no, it isn't. 24 months are a chance with the negation, the no, but succeeding on the affirmative trials, and it's not until 27 months that they succeed at both. So there's no evidence that no or not supports truth functional meaning. It's not in the bucket, or is it in the bucket? No does not mean not it is in the bucket or false it is in the bucket until 26 or 28 months of age, in spite of no being in the child's vocabulary for 14 or 16 months by that age. So this suggests that there's some common barrier to learning the truth functional meaning of no and not, and it's probably the absence of a mental symbol to map those onto. It could be internal to language learning itself or could be conceptual. Okay, so what I actually favor is that this is what is underlying success at the 17-month-old age, and that is a domain general form of negation, but it isn't it isn't the full combinatorial negative operator in a language of thought. I'm going to give you further evidence that that's likely to be the case. We can't tell from the bucket task or the Blicket detector task whether infants and animals are actually making an inference or just avoiding the empty bucket, or merely looking where the object might be. They're doing something relevant to the process of elimination in its domain general way. But here's the deductive inference one. They're setting up the premise A or B. They're computing not A. And then if you set this up, it's deductively certain that it's in B. There's another thing they might be doing. They're looking at that. They say, maybe A, maybe B. They are definitely eliminating an option. And that leads to the conclusion that maybe it's in B. That's not a deductive inference, right? It's just what's left after you've eliminated that option. The idea is, if this was 50-50, 50% probability, 50% probability, if you eliminate this option and this is still 50% probability, this is not the disjunctive syllogism. It's got to go up to 100%. So when can we find evidence for deductive certainty? This is a signature of a disjunctive syllogism. Another possibility is they're not even setting up this premise at all, just not A. In a search context, you don't want to search there, right? So it's just avoiding an empty bucket. We can rule this out in the animal literature I don't have time to tell you how, and I think that that's probably not the case. But it's deciding between these two that no one had ever looked at in this literature. There have been a few attempts to try to see whether the child or the animal is working through a deductive inference. One way is you can have, this is a way that Joseph Call, who is the person who invented the two-bucket task, which have now been done on hundreds of different animal species. And some individuals from many species can solve it spontaneously. There's some species where no animals spontaneously solve it. For no species do all animals spontaneously solve it, but it's been done millions of hundreds of times. But it's always assumed that success means working through a disjunctive syllogism, and this is what I'm going to question here. So you can also have a case where there are 3 tubes, and there is a reward hidden in one of the tubes. And the animal can turn over with some difficulty and look in the tube before they try to get the object out of the tube. And that's a rational thing to do because it's not easy to get the object out of the tube. So what they look at is, if the animal has already looked into 2 of the tubes and they're both empty, do they then just immediately go to the 3rd tube without looking to try to find where, try to get the object out? And what Joseph Call says is that both 2.5-year-olds and chimpanzees show that signature of deductive inference. That's what he concludes from his data, because something like 15% of the animals do that. But about 15% of the animals do that having only seen just one of them empty too. I mean, there's actually no evidence in his data for either 2.5-year-olds or chimpanzees that they are actually making that deductive inference. And there's been other attempt to look at this, which finds it not in dogs, and yes, in 5-year-old children. So in fact, the story is looking for the signature of deductive certainty. You find that animals and young children pattern differently from at least 5-year-olds. So what we did was look at this in the context of the cups task. So here's how we did it. We hide a sticker in one of 2 cups, and then we hide a sticker in one of 2 other cups. At that point, when we show them take these things away, the child should think maybe here, maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. Okay? Then we show them one is empty, So you can eliminate that option. So the question is, what does the child update this to this representation? In which case, they should look in the red one. But if they're just doing maybe A, maybe B, and eliminate an option, they might look 33%, 33%, 33%, because those are maybe A, maybe B, maybe C are still open. So we can decide between the deductive updating and this maybe A, maybe B interpretation by this way. Now, again, this is complicated. We need to show that young children understand this task. So we had training trials and practice trials where we set up this 50-50 versus 100%, but didn't involve any inference. So you hide a sticker in either the red cup or the green cup, or you hide a sticker in the blue cup. It's the only cup there. And so now you have 50%, 50%, 100%, which is the choices that you're left with after you've worked through the deductive inference in the other task. And do the kids understand that they should pick the certain choice, right? Can they do this task? Do they understand they should pick the certain choice? Can they remember these complicated events? And the answer is, no, this is a hard task for kids, but they are better than chance at 2.5, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so they can do the practice training trials. The question is, what happens in these trials, right? And the answer is, 2.5-year-olds search 33%, 33%, 33%. It could not be more strong evidence that they are not working through a deductive inference. And these age kids do it just as well, exactly as well as they do the training trials. There's no cost for working through the deductive inference. This is a hard task. It definitely makes hard demands on executive function. But if you just look at these three graphs, that's the deductive inference case. And here was the training trial. There's no statistical difference at the older age. So there's no cost of working through the deductive inference. And the 2.5-year-olds just don't do it. And we then went on and did the very same thing with the Blicket detector task. So the very same indirect screening off. These are warm-up trials where they just have to keep track of one did it and one didn't do it. These are baseline trials where you show them two at once, and then you show them one does and one didn't. So it's completely determinate which one they should choose. And they still are way better than chance at 2.5, 3. And this is the case where you show them A, B, and together, but there's two sets of two. Right? You show A, B together and C, D together, and then you show them B is not a Blicket, and you give them a choice among the remaining three, and 2.5-year-olds choose 33%, 33%, 33%, and the 3-year-olds and 3.5-year-olds succeed. So we have the same developmental pattern on three face-valid tasks of the disjunctive syllogism. Failure before 15 months, success at 17 months, but failure to show probe signatures of deductive reasoning, signatures of deductive reasoning by age 3. So what I'm telling you here is that you can't take this face-valid task, the simple call disjunctive syllogism task, as evidence that animals can work through a disjunctive syllogism. Right? It's just not. And that children don't seem to be, so we're doing better than the literature before, which the youngest evidence, but it was the only age where any children have been tested that they succeeded was 5. So we brought it down to 3 or 3.5, but decidedly not at 2.5, right? Across all three of these face-valid tasks, referent disambiguation and these other two. Okay, so what's changing between 17 months and 3-year-olds? They have linguistic not by 26 to 28, but they still fail to show the signatures of disjunctive syllogism. I think that they're not setting up the A or B premise. They're just not, it's just not engaging that. That might be because they don't have or yet, right? They don't produce or until age 3. So conclusions. In this case study, there is no evidence for symbols for logical connectives or and not in pre-linguistic thought coming from face valid tasks that are trying to get at the disjunctive syllogism. There's no evidence for the disjunctive syllogism until age 3 or in non-human animals. This was not the conclusion that I thought I would get when I started this work. I thought it would be easy to show this. And it may not be, we might find a way to find a simpler face valid task that we totally believe gets at what we're looking for. I mean, this is, I said, early days, but this is the conclusion I want to draw. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. I have a second case study, but it's totally parallel. I'm going to take 5 minutes and just do the first parts of it. So this is a case study where instead of logical connectives, it's representations of abstract relations. And the particular abstract relations are same and different. Okay. So the question is, do babies and animals have a mental symbol for the relation same and different? Because again, if they do, that can't be iconic in format. And is it a symbol that can serve as an input to other rules? So there's a huge literature for exactly this reason in the animal literature on this problem, because abstract relations are equally important in a language of thought as are logical connectives. And the earliest tasks are match-to-sample tasks. And these are really cool. So this is a bee task. The bee comes into a Y maze. At the beginning, there's a red square, and then comes up to a junction. And in match-to-sample, the rule he has to learn is if red, choose red. They learn that rule in 12 trials. That's not terrifically interesting. That's not abstract. But what they do, is they generalize it to new color without any further training. Once they've learned if red, choose red, if green, choose green, right? Then you give them yellow and blue, and they generalize it to if blue, choose blue, if yellow, choose yellow. But they also generalize it with no further training to orientations or odors. Okay, so there's a very abstract representation of same that is guiding their behavior. And they can also equally easily learn if blue, choose yellow, right? They can do non-match to sample, that is, pick the different one. That's how people think, how people think that they're doing. And we showed the babies can do that too, also in about 12 trials, right? So this is really easy, right? And the way we did it, reinforcing. It's really annoying, but the babies liked it. And the idea is, could they learn the rule that this one appears, then this one appears, and then this one tells you which one to look at. And in match to sample, you look to the one that's the same. And in mismatch to sample, you look to the one that's different. And in our training, they were all different symbols, right? I mean, we didn't give them 12 with just one of them, but we gave them 12 where it's always unique triads of symbols. And then the generalization trials is we look at where they look before we show them can they anticipate where to look? And the answer is yes, they learn it in about 12 trials, just like the bees do. But the question is, what rule did they learn? One possibility is they learn choose same and choose different for match to sample and mismatch to sample respectively. That's what's assumed in the animal literature. But another possibility is only a symbol for same plays a role here. They learn choose same or avoid same. That's equally possible. And we tested between those two hypotheses. So this is the same experiment with one difference. So instead of coming from the top, they were cards that flipped over. So first, one of the side cards flips over, another one of the side cards flips over, then the middle card flips over, and in match to sample, that predicts which of these looms, gets bigger and smaller, and a less annoying sound. And in mismatch to sample, this predicts the other one. Okay, so it's exactly the same structure as the test you got. But we could now use this to find out which rule they're learning by only giving them part of the information. So after they'd learned this with their 24 trials we gave them of training, we then did another 24 test trials where we only gave them partial information. So one of the things flipped over, and then the middle one flipped over. So this is visible same. So they never actually saw what was behind that. But if they had learned the rule, pick same in match to sample, then they've seen the antecedent to that rule in these trials. And in the visible different test trials, they haven't seen the antecedent to that rule. So you might think that they would be better at anticipating then it flips back over and they hear the sound that shows that the thing is looming, but they can't see it looming. And the question is, which one do they look at? Okay, so the idea is that if they learned seek same in match to sample, they should do better on visible same than visible different. The really interesting question is, what do they do on visible different? So if they learn the rule seek different, they've seen the antecedent to that rule in this case, so that should be easier. But if the rule they learned was avoid same in this case, they've seen the antecedent to that in this case as well. So the question is, what do they do on these partial information trials? And the answer is this. So focus on the match to sample first, the dark balls, the dark bars. They succeed on visible same. This is the percent of fixations on the correct response. They succeed on visible difference. They don't statistically succeed on visible different, which is exactly what you would expect if they learn the rule seek same. Now focus on the visible different trials for non-match to sample. Focus on the non-match to sample, which is light gray. Again, they succeed on visible same, and they totally fail on visible difference. They did not learn the rule seek different. They learned the rule avoid same. So there's no evidence for a symbolic representation of different, and there's no evidence for composition of same with not in this experiment. So again, decades of research on match to sample in animals need to be rethought as to what rule they're actually learning. And the reason I went through this, and I'm not going to do this whole case study, is that, again, now there's some abstract representation of same, but what is it like? I think what it's like is what they're actually doing in this match to sample task is forming they have a procedure. You encounter the first stimulus, you form a working memory model of that stimulus. And then the rule is to seek that stimulus or to avoid that stimulus. So the content of same or different is carried in a match computation, not in a symbol for same. And we actually have evidence for that as well. But the point here is that even once you find evidence for some abstract representation of sameness playing some role here, because it's definitely abstract, that generalizes to stimuli they haven't seen before, it still leaves open what those representations are like and whether there's a symbol for same. And I'm not going to show you the the rest of this talk, except for to tell you that there is a large literature where that representational schema won't work, and that's so-called relational match to sample, where you have at the top two cards. One exemplifies the relation different, and one exemplifies the relation same. And then you have a sample card that's either this or that. And you have to choose, if this is the sample, you have to choose that card. If this is the sample, you have to choose this card. This you definitely need an actual representation of same or different to do. And you don't get this in children till they're 5 years old. And you don't get this in animals, right? The words for same and different are learned only at age 3. 3 and 4-year-olds behave like pigeons and baboons in relational match to sample. Animals and young children until age 5 or 6 fail at the standard relational match to sample tasks. But when they succeed, they compose. There's no more asymmetry anymore between same and different. Different really means not same. So this is, again, evidence for a change in the underlying representational machinery, in this case abstract relations instead of logical contents, really late in baby and animal terms. This is happening not spontaneously until age 5. So, conclusions. Representations of same within match to sample may be entirely implicit. I didn't go through the evidence that there might be some representation of same that's instantiated in a pair that are the same, but that doesn't seem to compose with not. And until age 5, children like non-humans readily compute other properties over these sets, like the degree of variability or symmetry, but not same different. And explicit linguistic symbols are not mastered until age 3. But when they are, they're fully productive, and they compose with quantifiers like not all, and they define different as not same, just as adults do. So this developmental change with respect to the existence and formats of symbols for same and different, just as I think I showed you, there's evidence for logical connectives as well. So final conclusions. These are very early days in this research program. The evidence, as I said, is not what I thought I was going to find. The evidence is consistent with absence of a Fodorian language of thought in infancy. It's not fully explored in animals. It's possible that propositional representations with a language-like format and representations of abstract relations, such as same and different, logical connectives, such as and or not, arise in ontogenesis only upon mastering their natural language expressions. And as I said, that's not what I expected, but I see all of this research as at least consistent with that. I think this possibility is much more on the table than I would have thought when I went into this. So, thanks.
Take a quick break in case people have to leave.
Okay, so some questions before we go have a drink? Yeah.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I'm really impressed with the cleverness of the experiments you came up with to tease these things out. I did have a question about the ontogenetic aspect of it, saying that learning the words then gives you the concepts, which I mean is sort of a chicken-egg question.
That's right. That's essentially Fodor's argument.
Yeah, that you need. I mean, it could also be that you have no use for the words until you have concepts for them. But
yes, I completely agree. So when I say that, so the gap, the fact that kids don't learn the truth functional meaning of no and not until they're 27 months, there could be some change in the conceptual system that's unrelated to language acquisition that then allows them to learn the meanings of those words.
Yeah.
Or it could be that there's innate support for the meanings of those words within the language acquisition device, such that when it's triggered by other aspects of language acquisition, makes those symbols available widely for thought, or it could be neither of the above, right? But there's a logical point, which is, how do you learn the meanings of the words if you don't, at least at that point, have the concepts available to you? And that is another lesson of the number learning work. So that the innate systems of core cognition that support number word learning don't allow you to represent the meaning of 7. And it's only when you've learned to count and figured out how counting represents number that you actually have a representation available to you to support the meaning of the word 7. So the idea would be some kind of bootstrapping of that sort. So it's not a logical necessity that it was available antecedent in non-linguistic thought before you mastered it in the language case. All those options are still open.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, the ontogenetic issue, I mean, what if you look at it phylogenetically, right? I mean, so ontogenetically, I mean, it could be that you don't learn the meaning of or so on until you've gotten the word or, but phylogenetically, if at some point no one had the meaning or the meaning same or different, then how did the words develop in the first place? Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have a word for a concept that you find useful.
Yeah, so again, this same story, same question arises in the number case. So, and we know the actual answer in the number case. We know the small steps that were made over the anthropological record of coming to finally having an integer list which gave meaning to the representation 7. So it doesn't happen in one fell swoop. So the idea would be that in the course of the evolution of language, first you got explicit representations of propositions, which you need to have logically before you would ever have a function that inverts the truth value of a proposition. And there would have been a lot of small steps, right, but of course this is lost to the history of time. You're not going to have an anthropological record to do it. But again, there are cases that show that that it's only because you're imagining that you go from none at all to the full-blown thing that this seems to be a logical impossibility. And of course we don't know what the evolution of language, but that's where you would have to, if this story says that the innate support for these symbolic representations of these logical connectives is within the language acquisition device, then the phylogenetic story has to be, what's the evolution of language like, right? So what were the steps, like, where do you get an eye out of part of an eye? Where do you get language out of part of language? And could you have representations of argument structure just for affirmatives before you had the logical connectives? Possibly, right? So that would be the story. And nobody knows what the phylogenetic story for the evolution of language, what it looks like. And it's, unfortunately, it's hard to see how you're ever going to get any evidence with respect to that, because there are no animals that seem to have part of it, right? So you can't do what you did for the eye. We actually know what the intermediate steps are to get you to an eye or to get you to wings, right? But we don't have any evidence with respect to that. But I agree that this is exactly the form of argument that makes Fodor think that it's obvious that the story has to be that the full combinatorial language of thought has to be available way before the evolution of language, because how could you ever get language? That's what language expresses. And I don't think that's not a logical necessity. It's not how number works. And really we need to just have, so we have to do, what we can do is compare it, we can look at signature cases in non-human animals as well as babies. And it looks like the same answer appears for both of them, right? You know, basically, both of them are limited in the same ways in the patterns of successes and failures on these tasks, which needn't be the case, because after all, human babies are going to quickly learn this. They have it all by age 3, right? But I think the innate support for it is probably within language acquisition. Anyway, that's consistent with the data I showed you. But I agree. The point is the points you're raising are exactly the right logical spacing. That's what makes it an interesting case study.
So I would have thought that the simplest logical connective was and. And so, I mean, teaching formal logic, some undergraduates have trouble with this kind of syllogism. And so, but nobody has trouble with conjunction elimination. Everybody knows A and B entails A. So have you done any work on conjunction, or why not?
Well, why not is that parallel individuation models all instantiate and, right? So the question is, how could you, so you would have to look for something like conjunction elimination or conjunction, you know, introduction or something like that. How would you look for it, right? So I agree that, and so interestingly, and consistent with your review, is that children produce and really early. So by 2-0, it's way up there like no. And the question is, though, what does it mean for them? And it seems to be an and, because if you say to the child, here's a bunch of things, could you put the strawberry and the pear in the cup?
Right.
They put the strawberry and the pear in the cup.
Right.
But unfortunately, if you say, would you put the strawberry or the pear in the cup, they also put the strawberry and the pear in the cup. So it doesn't actually provide evidence that they understand and, but they produce it in appropriate contexts.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty minimal test, and I don't know how you could look for it.
To what extent do you think that if they do have and, that could play the central role in getting you to the integer list?
I don't think it's the central role.
No,
Because
no.
they have and way, years before they get to the integer list.
So then, it seems like, if it turns out that they, yeah.
Right, so I mean, I do completely agree that if they didn't have and, they wouldn't get to the integer list, but it's not remotely sufficient. I mean, they distinguish and from or, certainly in comprehension as well as production, by 3. They really have they have the capacity, they can even put and at the right part of the tree. So can you give me a fish that's red and blue? They give you a fish that is half red and half blue. Can you give me a red fish and a blue fish? They give you 2 fish, one that's red and one that's blue. And they distinguish both of them. Can you give me from the red fish or this is 3-year-olds,
Right.
young 3-year-olds, 3-0. So by 3-0, they definitely have and or. It's very sophisticated. They know where in the tree that this should be. So, but then again, that's already in the age range where they're doing all these other things.
Yeah.
And we don't know whether they have that at 2 and 2.5.
Yeah, okay.
So, right. So the reason we didn't do and is simply we just didn't see a way of getting at whether they have the right meaning of it. You mentioned 2 things. The natural thing is to do something with those 2 things.
Yeah, right.
So it's hard to think of what the task would be.
Yeah.
If you had an idea, I'd be interested.
So you think a possible conclusion would be that if there is something like language of thought going on that lets us be logical beings, right? That it's actually like just language, like so.
That's what I.
It's just internalized language. We're talking to ourselves, or simulating talking to other people or something like that.
Well, I
And
think it's not just that.
arguing against that, right? He rejected that outright. That can't be right. It's not language, but if I think inside my head what it's like to have a complex thought and try to
It's
do it
always in
without
language.
talking myself, I can't do that. So.
Yeah. So I think that's not that's not what I'm arguing for here, but I'm actually sympathetic to that conclusion. What I would argue, if you look at the literature on formal semantics, which is a gorgeous literature in linguistics, you need the big guns of logic to actually characterize how the semantic combinatorial machinery works. And it's very subtle. So, for example, you have upward and downward entailing context interacting with the syntax in various ways. And this is cross-linguistically universal, and it's surprising, right? And what formal semanticists or what philosophers of language like Paul Piotrowski do is they say, well, what logic do you need for formal semantics? Because of course there's so logic has just become a blank branch of mathematics where you explore all kinds of formal systems. And the answer is you need modal logic, you need propositional logic, you need the predicate calculus. You don't need the arcane logics that logicians have invented, but you draw on the first logics that were formalized. And those are needed for just capturing the combinatorial properties, the semantic combinations that follow from the syntactic combinations. So what I would say for sure, what this is consistent with, is that those logical capacities are part of language. And what this isn't about is the very late development of formal logic, right? So you could have, because 3-year-olds have the thing I just answered in response to Sean about putting the and and the or at the right part of the tree. These kids are going to definitely not be able to do formal logic, right? That is an abstraction. That is something that we develop, the way we develop mathematics, by reflecting on the way our number systems work, right? So and it's a very late development in cultural history, right? I mean, the early work on logic that started with Aristotle was this really dull work on a whole set of classes of syllogisms, and you don't get to modern logic till the 19th century, right? So very late development. What I would say that this work suggests is that all of that is reflective abstraction of the logical resources that are part of language. The semantics of natural language is the explanandum that people are trying to formalize, the intuitions that people are trying to formalize when they start doing logic in a modern way. And that's different from you can't think logically unless you're thinking in language. But I think that's true too. It follows from the same picture in a way. Because you don't think logically unless you're thinking in the medium that makes use of that where those are the rules that underlie the conceptual combinations that you can make.
Yeah, I have to say, when I said to think logically, I wasn't speaking as like a philosopher of logic. I was just thinking like,
To think at all.
thinking about stuff at all. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense in a sensible way.
Yeah, I think that I'm very, that's very consistent with this work as well.
But just to follow up on that, you can do some logical work without thinking linguistically, because you can think of things in terms of intersecting Venn diagrams or something like that. So you can capture some parts of logic without language.
Sure, but did you ever invent Venn diagrams until you already had formalized it in other ways? So that's just like saying, I mean, when you start doing the work of formalizing and systematizing that we do when we do logic, think of what was gained when Descartes invented Cartesian coordinates. He created a mapping between graphical representations, in this case of algebraic functions, and algebraic representations. And each of those representational systems make explicit different aspects of the structure of what's doing. And so, yes, you can do that, right? But it's equally a symbolic representation, just like geometry is a symbolic representation. And I don't think there's any evidence that anybody invented Venn diagrams until much later. But it's also the case that the mental models, like in parallel individuation, are constrained by, what are you doing when you open up a new object file? That's an AND operator in a way, where you had one and then another one enters, right? So implicit in the computations that are defined over purely non-linguistic representations are all these logical functions. That's for sure. But that doesn't mean that they're available to be input to the kind of working, explicitly symbolized and input into rules. Right? So there's two ways of response here, which is, yes, if it's explicitly symbolized, it's a question of whether, yes, you can do that, and graphical representations capture aspects of the structure in a way that when you construct the mapping between the two, you have a deeper understanding of both, because each symbol system makes different aspects of it sort of explicit or salient. So that's a really powerful method to get to a deeper understanding of something, but that only happens when you're already in that business. But it's also the case that these logical, that there's a logic to the computations that are within module that you're using in all the computations you make. And they're going to include representations of abstract representations, they're going to abstract relations, they are going to abstract within that domain. They are going to include match computations, they're going to include AND gates, OR gates, etc. Right, absolutely. Right. And so, but that doesn't mean that they're available for thought.
So, I'm just wondering, animals that have, non-human animals that have some kind of vocabulary, have there been any attempts to see if they can bootstrap understanding of new concepts using those words? Teaching the successor principle to macaques or something?
Yes, I happen to have done such a study with Irene Pepperberg. It was the last study that Alex the parrot did before he died.
Yeah.
And what we did was, over 30 years, he had learned the meanings of the words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
And he also knew to apply those words to Arabic numerals. And he knew that the order of the Arabic numerals derived from the order of the cardinal values. So he knew that 5, the Arabic numeral, was a bigger number than 3, right?
Yeah.
So we knew all that before we did the study. We taught him to label Arabic numerals 7 and 8, 7 and 8. At this point, he has no evidence that they're numerals. They're just arbitrary shapes, and we taught him to label this one 7 and this one 8. Then we taught him 7 is bigger than 6, and 8 is bigger than 7, just as a fact about the Arabic numerals, right? That's his first evidence that these are numerals. So he learned 8 is bigger than 7, 8 is bigger than 6, 7 is bigger than 6, 6 is less than 7, 6 is smaller, the Arabic numeral is smaller than 6, than 7, and 8, so on. And then we asked, well, did he integrate that with his whole numeral list? So then, without any further testing, we gave him 3 and asked which is bigger. 2 Arabic numerals, the Arabic numeral 7 and the Arabic numeral 3, where of course the Arabic numerals are the same size, but the question is, which is bigger? And he
understood in a serial order.
So he integrated. Okay, but now here's the crucial induction. Does he infer from this what cardinal value 7 is? This is a wildly unsupported induction, right? Because what I've taught you is consistent with 7 being 1,000 and 8 being 1,000,000. All you know is that 7 is bigger than 6. And okay. But in all of the training
Well,
he ever
why should
had,
he, if he doesn't?
Well, I'll tell you.
Right.
Because in all the training he ever had before, he was never trained a new number that was any more than one off from the numbers that he'd been trained before. So he'd learned 3 and 4, then 2 and 5, then 1 and 6. So all of his training so far was the new numerals were just one off from one he already knew. So even though it's a wildly unsupported induction, it's the induction he made. The very first time we showed him a set of 7 and said how many, he said 7. The very first time we showed him a set of 8 and asked him how many, he said 8. Oops, 7. I mean 7. Oops, 8. Self-corrected. And then he both produced and comprehended them above chance with no training. He had never seen the Arabic numerals or the words 7 or 8 paired with a cardinal value. That is the same induction that kids make at 3 and a half. I didn't expect that result. And that shows that it's not the bootstrapping capacities that distinguish us from other animals. I mean, he had to align order in a list, these 2 different representational media, to come up with the induction of what cardinal values 7 and 8 were from that training regime.
Right. Now,
it took 30, unfortunately, when we first submitted this paper, they said, well, this is really clever, but you need to replicate it with another parent. It was 30 years of training before we got in the position to do that experiment,
Right.
you know, and I wrote back and said, look, you
This will be part 1.
so it was published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So going back to bucket tasks where we're forming between, like, are you forming A or B, or just eliminating examples, one possibility that seems consistent with both is that they have the capacity to formulate A or B, but that's kind of shortcutted by, I don't know, kind of like thinking fast and slow, where, you know, there's a kind of immediate reaction to just do elimination and, you know, make the decision kind of on autopilot before thinking deliberately about it, and it doesn't even occur to them, even though they have the capacity to, like, think about it more
Sure.
and do reasoning. Do we have any, like, evidence either, like, for or against that?
Yeah, so that's always a possibility, right? And that's why the control tasks are important here, right? And the only reason you would take that capacity seriously, though, is if you could provide positive evidence that they had that ability. And so that's why we did 3 different domains. That's why we did trying to see whether they could condition a response on not A, right? We did all these experiments to find evidence for that capacity so that we might be missing in these experiments. So, but that's why I say this is early days in this thing. I think that that's very much a possibility. That what's changing here is something about executive function information processing capacity, right? And these are complicated tasks. And so we might be missing a competence that they have, but that's only interesting if you can think of a method that could show that and then go out and show it. And the reason I'm even presenting this work is that there are 10 different tasks here trying to show this, and we don't see it. So, but might we see it tomorrow? Absolutely. I mean, I still think it's very likely that what's changing here is executive function, cognitive control, the working memory and other aspects of cognitive. These experiments, I didn't do them in great detail. Control for a lot of different executive functions. It's not ability to inhibit or, you know, inhibition of retention or things like that. Those are controlled for in these tasks. And there's also working memory controls in these tasks. But nonetheless, I think it's very possible that that will turn out to be what's common. So what you have is this common developmental trajectory. And it's either something internal to the logical combinatorial itself, or it's something domain general about the information processing demands of all of these tasks. But these tasks make very different information processing demands, and that they're chosen for that reason. So they draw on memory differently, and yet they show this developmental thing. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. It's a possibility, and it's only interesting, though, if you could come up with a task that I could do that would convince you that they had the competence in question, and we would go do it on one of the ages where they're failing and see if they could do it. And I'd be really interested. But yes, it's always a logical possibility, but I think it's an empirical possibility too. Right. So no, do we have anything that rules it out? No. But we have a weight of evidence that is pointing in the same direction. I only showed you a tiny part of the same different thing, but it's actually parallel to the other one in detail, right? So 2 case studies that are showing the same kind of picture, and so I'm beginning to believe it. At least I'm making that argument today. Yeah.
So, for better or worse, Cormac McCarthy recently wrote a paper on the origins of language, and so he sort of talks
You
about.
mean a novelist?
Yeah. But he argues that, you know, like these sudden like insights that we have, you know, like the double helix or something like that was a animal chasing its own tail. So I'm just wondering, like, back to sort of thinking whether or not we think in language, how would that idea account for something like that sort of happens outside of our awareness? Like,
So I don't believe that,
Okay.
right? You know, I mean, I think if you actually read the history of science about the discovery of the double helix, it was incredibly slow and piecemeal. It wasn't a sudden insight by any means. There were many subparts of it.
Actually,
The benzene,
That's,
yeah.
that's a total myth, right?
Right.
You know, that's just not how it works, these conceptual changes. So you can characterize CS1 where the concepts aren't there, and CS2 where they are, but actually, it's a very piecemeal picture between one and the other. And it's just not the case that you have this sudden, you had it in dream, outside of awareness, and then full-blown, the new conceptual system becomes available to you. That's
Right.
just silly. And it's not true in the history of science, and it's not, you know, it's just not, you know, I just don't believe that that's the story. Now, and people, that's Chomsky's view of how language emerges, but it's not a one step.
Well, I guess like a related question is like, you know, can we think in sensory modalities that are sort of somehow related to language? Like, you know, we have a label that goes with a, you know, a visual representation. So can the visual representation happen without the label and have produced some sort of insight that is not?
Sure. So the perception. So the perceptual representations in this case partly provide the explananda that you're trying when you try to systematize. Because if it's true that this logical machinery is internal to those computational systems, then if it occurs to you to try to systematize that, then it would be the same thing as systematizing external data, right? So because the perceptual representations have overlapping content, right? So they can play a huge role in so I think that the work on the role of the interplay between these abstract representations and perceptual ones in the imaging literature and in the developmental literature is really interesting, right? So they interact in all kinds of interesting ways, but including giving you the intuitions that you need to systematize when you start to systematize them. Yeah.
In some ways, it's a working memory assistant in some ways, right? If you can view these other representations with additional meaning, you don't have to hold on to that while you perform these other logical computations. So
Right.
you can chunk it in a way.
That's
It's
right,
doing
yeah.
more at
Yeah,
once.
that's right. And then if you look at the computations that underlie that chunking, they are that content is implicit in them, right? They're
Right.
guided by that
Exactly.
content.
Yeah.
Right? So again, in both the abstract relation case and the logical connectives case, I don't think that there is a proposal on the table that you could do cognitions without match computations with respect to same different. You couldn't have models of recognition, you couldn't do habituation, you couldn't do adaptation, you couldn't do anything, right? So that's not the question. Why is our work not done? Because that match computation is internal to all kinds of processes we have. It doesn't mean you have a symbol that means same.
Right.
Right. And similarly, if you look at the history of connectionism, there were feed-forward connectionist systems that were pretty good at pattern recognizers. Go back to Selfridge. Then Minsky and Papert showed that those systems can't do exclusive OR. And then connectionism was dead in the water. Nobody was considering this as a formalism that could be a computational model of anything. And then Rumelhart and Mike Jordan showed with backpropagation, that with hidden layers, you could do exclusive OR. And now connectionism takes off again, right? So there's just, it's just not on the table that OR gates and AND gates and negative functions are part of our computational machinery. There's no computational model of anything that doesn't have those, and lots more. Various operations on sets, all kinds of things. But that doesn't mean you have the notion of a set, right? Or a symbol for AND and OR. And so that is what this work is about. And of course, it does depend on making good of how you distinguish within module computations from the things that you want to count as reasoning and thought, right? And as I said, I don't really have a very satisfying thing to tell you about that. It's sort of seat of the pants. But seat of the pants, things that can be held in working memory and be the basis at that far end of the bottleneck of our choice behavior and inference behavior, can be input to arbitrary rules. Those are on the thought side, and all of these are that.
Well, let us thank Susan again.